Hi there. In this video, we will create an ASP.NET Razor Pages app from scratch, and we will perform CRUD operations on a SQL Server database using Entity Framework. This will be an amazing application for beginners who want to learn more about CRUD operations in Razor Pages, or if you want to refresh your memory. Let me take you through the app that we will build. We will create a new .NET 6 application from scratch, and it will be on a Razor Pages template. On the home page, we will see the list of employees. We will also build a page from which we can create a new employee. On adding the details, we can use the submit button to create this new employee. On the list page, you can view and edit the details of any employee. If you want to delete an employee, you can use the delete button, and that employee will be deleted from the database, and the application takes you back to the list page. If you like this video, do check out my 13-hour long ASP.NET Razor Pages course that I have created on Udemy that covers everything from scratch to finish. It covers the basic concepts of CRUD operations, but also uses the best practices to use Entity Framework and using the repository pattern. In this course, you will use Bootstrap 5, image upload functionality using a cloud platform, rich text editor, notifications, authentication and authorization, dependency injection, and a lot of other advanced topics of ASP.NET Razor Pages. I have this on a discount for my YouTube audience, so check out the video description for the discount coupon. With that said, let's jump into this video. I have created a new folder for myself, and in here we will create our ASP.NET 6 Razor Pages CRUD operation app, and I will open Visual Studio 2022. Using this button, I will create a new project, so I will click on that. It takes me to the next page from which we can select a project template. We want to create a Razor Pages application, and the second option, when I see over here, I have my filters as C#, all platforms, and all project types. And the second option we have over here is the ASP.NET Core web application. And if you read the description, it uses the Razor Pages framework. So we will select that and click on next. It takes you to the next page where you can configure your new project, such as the location and the project name. So we will copy the folder location and paste it here, and also give it a project name. I will type Razor Pages Demo App. And once you've given the name and the solution name, click on Next. From this screen, you can select the framework that you want to select for the .NET framework. So I am selecting .NET 6, which is a long-term support version, and it is the latest version as the time of the recording of this video. So with that selected and all the other options as is, I will create the project using this create button. It takes a few seconds for Visual Studio to create this application, and we have these files that Visual Studio has created as part of this template. Looking at the structure of the files, we can clearly see there's a difference to how we used to create the MVC application, because we no longer see the model, views, and controller folders, but rather we see the pages folder. And if we expand on the pages folder, all the pages for this web application resides in this pages folder over here. For example, we have the index page, which also serves as the home page. So we have the index.cs HTML, which is the Razor page and holds HTML, CSS, and also some C# stuff. And the code behind class, for example, the onGet and onPost methods of this index Razor page will belong to the index.cs HTML.cs class, which is the code behind class. So this class will have the onGet and onPost methods for the index model. So this is quite a page-centric approach of how we create web applications using ASP.NET Core. And we also have this program.cs file in which we are adding Razor Pages to our services collection and also mapping the endpoints for these Razor Pages to our application as well. So let's start this application and see what we get out of the box. Our application is running and we see a new website which is using Bootstrap version 5 for the CSS, and it's showing the top nav over here. It has this body section which changes when we load a new page, and it also has this footer over here. So when we open the privacy page, it goes to the URL /privacy and it shows the privacy information in this body section over here. If we come back to the home page, this is the index page that we saw inside the pages folder. So if I open /index, it will open the same page. So home is basically our index page. So we have a new website, but we want to add more pages to this website so that we can perform CRUD operations to the database. So we will go back to the code and do some coding. Back into our application, I've stopped the application, and in here we want to use Entity Framework, which is an ORM, which stands for an Object Relational Mapping Tool. And we basically want to use Entity Framework to talk to our SQL Server database. And it could be any database, but for this example, we are using a SQL Server database. So we will use Entity Framework to perform CRUD operations on a SQL Server database. And to use it, we have to first install it. To install Entity Framework, I will right click on Dependencies and open Manage NuGet Packages. In here, I will go to the Browse section and I would like to install these two packages. The first one is Microsoft.entityframeworkcore.sql server. So copy that and I will paste it in the Browse section. I will select this one from Microsoft and install this. Once this is installed, I will go on and install the second package, which is Microsoft.entityframeworkcore.tools. So I will copy this and again search in the Browse section over here and select that to install it. Now that we have installed the packages for Entity Framework, we want to create a DB context class. A DB context acts as a bridge between your domain classes and the database. DB context is the primary class that is responsible for interacting with the database. Back into our application, I can now close the NuGet package manager. And in here, we want to create a new class, but I will first create a folder. So I will right click on the project, add a new folder, and I will call this data. Inside the data folder, I will create a new class. So right click on data, add a new class, and we will name this class Razor Pages Demo DB Context, and click on add. Now we have the class ready. This DB context class inherits from a base class, which is DB context. So I will inherit this from the DB context class, and it comes from the packages that we installed. So I will control dot over here on DB context, and I will use this reference Microsoft.entityframeworkcore. So I'll add the missing reference over here. Now we have to create a constructor so that when we pass the options of the DB context options from our program.cs file, we pass that further down to the DB context. There's a shortcut available for that as well. So if you click on the class name and press control dot, you can generate the constructor with the options parameter, and that's the DB context options. And we will populate the DB context options from the program.cs class in just a moment. Once we have this constructor, we can now define the properties that this DB context class will have. And using those properties, we will be able to communicate with the tables inside the database. In our case, it will be a SQL Server database. So we will define a new property using the shortcut prop and then press tab twice. It creates a new property. This property will be of type dbset, and dbset further takes a type, and that will be our entity or the domain model for our application. So let's create the domain model. I will come to the project folder, right click to add a new folder here. So add new folder. I will call this one models. So I want to create this in parallel to other folders. So I will rename this to models. Inside the models folder, I will create another folder and I will call that domain. So this will hold our domain models or entities. So I will create my first domain model inside this domain folder. So right click, add a new class. And because we want to perform CRUD operations on employees, so I will create an employee domain model. So I will rename this class to employee.cs, click on add. And in here, we want to add a few properties to this employee domain model. The first property I will add over here will be the ID of this employee. So I will use a GUID for this one, which is a unique identifier. And I will name this property ID. The next one will be the name of the employee. So I can use the suggested property, which is public string name. And as you can see here, now we have the nullable option for the project. So we can say we have the nullable option as enabled. So that means this name over here has to be a not null. If you want to keep it as a null, you have to specify it as a nullable property. But in our case, we want name to be not null, so we will not put that question mark over there. After the name property, we will add another property, which will be of type string, and the name of the property will be email. Then we want to also capture the salary and display the salary. So that will be of type long. We can just use this as an example. You can put it as a decimal as well, but just for this example, I'm using a long. So that'll be salary. After that, we want to record the date of birth for the employee. So that will be a date time. And you can name this date of birth. And finally, we will have the department name. So a string type, and the name of the property is department. So we have defined the properties for our domain model, and using these properties, we will fetch, create, update, and delete the records inside the database using Entity Framework Core. Now that we have our employee domain model ready, we can come back to the DB context and provide the employee details over here as a property. So this property will be a DB set of type employee domain model. So let's get the missing references, and it comes from the domain model folder. So that's correct. The name of the property over here will be used by Entity Framework Migrations or EF migrations to create a new table in the database if it doesn't exist already. So the name of the table we want to create will be employees. And using this property, we can further query or update or delete employees using Entity Framework. So now that we have created the DB context class, it's now time to inject this using dependency injection inside the program.cs file so that it is available to our application. We will come to the program.cs file, and after this line which says builder.services.add Razor Pages, we will add another service to our services collection. So using builder, this is builder.services.add DB context, and this takes a type, and the type of the DB context is the one that we created, which is Razor Pages demo DB context. So I will type that and press Control dot to get the missing dependencies. So using Razor Pages data, so it comes from the data folder. And I will open the brackets and it takes the DB options builder. So I will say options such that, and in here I will say options dot use SQL Server, because we want to tell the DB context to use a SQL Server database, and also we will mention the connection string to that database. So I will first write use SQL Server and press Control dot to bring in the dependencies from Microsoft Core. So I have the Microsoft.entity framework core packages and the data folder over here. And to this use SQL Server, it basically takes the key or the connection string inside. So we can use the connection string over here, or we can get it from the app settings.json, which is a best practice. So let's create a connection string inside the app settings.json. In my app settings, I will create a new key, which will be connection strings. And inside the object, I will create a new key again, and that will be the name of the connection string I want to use for this application, for this database to be in particular. So we want to use the Razor Pages demo connection string. So that is the key or the name to this connection string. And in the quotes, I will mention the value of the connection string. So for the connection string, it takes this format. We need to tell it the server name. We need to tell it the database information, and also trusted connection is equal to true. So I will copy that, paste it over here, and then add the missing information. So I want to first mention the server name that I want to use for this project. So I will open my SQL Server installed. I have installed a local instance of SQL Server to my system, and I also have installed this Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio to query the database and servers. So this is the server that I have installed, and that's the name for it. And I can copy it, but also do confirm that you are able to connect to it and only use that name that you are able to connect it with. So I'll connect it, and you can see that it gets connected, and I can also see the databases that I have. So I will use this server name over here inside my connection string, and I want to create a new database. So I will mention the name of the database I want to create. So I can say this will be the Razor Pages demo DB. So this will be the name that will get created inside our databases over here. And you can see we don't have any database for this name, Razor Pages demo DB. And that is all the information it needs. So we will come back to the program.cs file and add this information. So we want to give it a string of the connection string, but that comes from app settings. So using the builder again, we will read the app settings. So builder.configuration.get connection string, and we want to specify the name of the connection string. So make sure you copy the name that you have given over here inside your connection strings and paste it inside the get connection string method as an argument, and make sure you have enough brackets so it's working fine. So now we have created a DB context class. We have also created our domain model and properties so that we are able to access those tables. And we also have injected this DB context class inside the program.cs file, which utilizes the connection string defined in the app settings. So we have done all the configuration work. It's now to actually run Entity Framework Core migrations so that the application can create this new database inside our SQL Server database. So for that, I will go to Tools and go to NuGet Package Manager and open Package Manager console. In here, I want to execute two commands one by one. So the first command I want to run is the add-migration, and I will come back to Package Manager console. I will write add-migration, and give a space, and inside double quotes I can give the name of the migration. Because we are creating this migration for the first time or running this migration for the first time, I can give it an initial migration name. So I can say this is initial migration, and this name could be anything. And after that I will press enter, and what Entity Framework Core is doing is it's creating a migration file. So it's creating a C# version of the migration so that it knows everything that it wants to execute to create this new database and the new tables inside this database. So as you can see here, we have a new migrations folder with a migration file called initial migration, and it has everything to create this new table employees with all the information for the table and the columns inside it. Now we will come back to Package Manager console and run this migration. So the command for that is update-database. So we will come back and say update-database, and it will then use this migration file to execute on the SQL Server database that we have using the connection string that we told the application. It has completed the migration, and if we come back to our database or the SQL Server in local instance, and if I refresh the SQL Server, we now have a new database, which is the Razor Pages DemoDB, and that's the same database name that we define inside our app settings. And we should have one table, which is the employees, and it has the columns, the same columns as we defined as properties inside our domain class. So using Entity Framework now, we are able to access this employees table, and we should be able to perform CRUD operations on this employees table. Let's come back to our application, and now it's time to create the CRUD functionality that we were talking about. And we will start with creating a new folder structure for the employees, and we will start with creating a new employee and adding the details to the database. So I will expand on the pages folder, and I will create a new folder over here. So right click on pages folder, add a new folder, and I will call this employees. Inside the employees folder, I want to create a new Razor page. So right click employees, add a new Razor page. I will use the empty template and click on add. And I will call this Razor page add. So add.cshtml. So I will create this Razor page. Now this Razor page is empty, so let's just start by adding a heading to this page using the h1 tag, and I will say this is the add new employee Razor page. And let's start our application to see if it's coming up on the screen or not. Our application is running, but now we want to navigate to this newly created page. And the way routing works in Razor Pages is it will map to the pages folder by default. And after that, I will mention the folder that I created. So that was the employees folder. So /employees. And then I created the Razor page, which was add. So /add. And this route gets mapped to the Razor page that we created. So if I enter that, it opens the add new employee Razor page. So now we have the page ready. We want to create some HTML controls or elements on this Razor page so that we can submit a form and then pass the details back to the code behind class of this Razor page. Then use Entity Framework to save all these changes into the database. So let's come back to our code. In my add.cshtml Razor page, I will give a margin bottom to this heading. So I will specify the class of mb-3, and all the classes that I use are Bootstrap classes. And if you want to know more about Bootstrap, you can go to the Bootstrap website to have a look at their documentation. After the heading, we will have some controls. So I will use a div and I will give it a class of margin bottom -3 so that we have separation from each and every element. Then I will have a label for this element, and the label will be the name because we want to capture a few details. And if I show you the model again, we have the name, we have the email, salary, date of birth, and department. So we want to capture all these information from this add page. So the first one is name. So the label will be called name. This label will have a class, which is again a bootstrap class, which is form-label. And after the label, we will have an input element. So input element, which is of type text. Now I will get rid of the name and value property attributes, and we will later on use the ASP handlers and the ASP for attributes and define our own model properties. This input element will also have a class, which is the bootstrap CSS class, and that will be form-input. Actually, it is form-control. And again, we will specify the ASP for attributes for these input elements later on, but we will continue to just add the controls first. So this is for the name. I will copy this div and we will create one more for email. This input element will be of type email. So email, and class would be form control again. Now we will have another one, and let's see the model again to see what do we want. We want the salary. So that will be the name of salary. This will be of type number, and class is form control. Next, we need a date time to add the date of birth. So I will copy this and paste it one more time. The label will be date of birth, and the type will be date. And finally, we have the department, which is just a string. So I will copy this one more time. This time the label will say department, and the type will be just text. And finally, we need a button so that we can submit a form, and we also have to create a form, but let's create a button first. So I will get rid of the label and input fields, and I will add a button which will be of type submit, and we will give it a class which is btn space btn -primary. You can have a different class as well, just to make it visually different. The value or the text of this button would say save. And now we have this form ready, so I can use this hot reload feature in Visual Studio. And if I come back, I can refresh this page, and now we have this form ready to be submitted. To be able to submit a form inside the Razor Pages application, we have to bind these values inside a form. So I will wrap all of this inside a form element. I can get rid of the action. The method attribute says post, which is correct. And this is the form end tag. So I will cut that and paste it right at the bottom, even after the submit button. Now, when this button is pressed, the form that is enclosed is submitted. And when the form is submitted, it goes back to the onPost method of this add Razor page. So to go to the code behind class as a shortcut, you can press F7, and that toggles you between the code behind class and the Razor class. So we have the add model, and that only has the onGet method, but we also want to submit the form so that we can capture the values. So we will create an onPost method. So public void onPost. Now, to be able to get the values from the form, which is on the Razor page, back inside the code behind class, we would need a property that binds the values and passes it back to our code behind class. So we need one or more values so that we can pass the values from the form. For that, we would use a view model. So we can create a view model inside the models folder, and I will first create a folder for view models. So right click on models, add a new folder, and I will call this, I have to stop the application first. So new folder, and call this view models. Inside the view models folder, I will create a class, and I will call this the add employee view model. And this will be the class responsible to pass the information of the form to me in the code behind class. So this will have a few properties, and the properties would be similar to the domain model, but we don't want the ID coming from the UI. We will generate our own ID. So all we need is the information that we display on the form. So we have to add these 5 properties to the add employee view model. So we need the name, we need the email, salary, date of birth, and department. And let's come back to the code behind class. So we need to create a property, and this property will be the one that we created, which is the add employee view model. Let's get the missing references from the view models folder, and we can say this is the add employee request. Now, to be able to get the values from the form, we have to bind this to the form, and in Razor Pages we get the bind attribute. So as an attribute, we can say this is the bind property. So we will use the bind property attribute to bind this property to the code behind, to the Razor page. So we can now use this property inside the Razor page. So let's go back to the Razor page using F7. And in here, to all these fields, we will now bind individual properties from the add employee request model. So we will say for the name, we will say ASP-for. So this is the for attribute, and this is for the name of the model, which is add employee request dot, and you would see auto suggesting already because Visual Studio knows that the model that we have mentioned in the code behind class is for this Razor page, and this is for the name. So I will say ASP-for name. Similarly, for email, we will say ASP-for the add employee request dot email. We will do the same for salary. So ASP for add employee request dot salary. For date of birth, we will say ASP-for add employee request dot date of birth. And finally, we have for department. So ASP-for add employee request dot department. And now you can see why we added these 5 fields inside the view model, and we didn't need the ID because Entity Framework Core will create its own ID for this employee. So using that, in the Razor page, when we submit the form, all these values are being passed again inside the code behind class in this property. And in the onPost method, we can use and read this property and the values inside the property. So I will put a breakpoint over here just to demonstrate, and I will start my application. I will navigate to the add page. So employees/add. And we have this form. So let's fill up some values. Let's say we fill up my name. And then department, let's say, is IT. And let's save this, and we have a breakpoint back inside the onPost method. So it stops over there. If I hover over the request over here and the property, we can see that all the values that we passed inside the form from the Razor page is now being captured inside this property. And it's only possible because we are using this bind property attribute. If we don't use this, we are still able to display the values to the form, but are not able to get the values from the form. So this bind property is really helpful in that way. Now that we know we have the values of the form coming back, we can use these values and create a new employee using Entity Framework. So I will stop the application. And to use Entity Framework, we have to inject the DB context so that we can use the DB context class, as we learned in the initial few minutes of this video, that DB context class acts as a bridge between Entity Framework and your database. So I will create a constructor. We're using the shortcut CTOR and then press tab twice. I will inject the constructor. I will inject the DB context inside the constructor using constructor injection. So I will say the DB context is the Razor Pages. So Razor Pages demo DB context. Press Control dot and add the missing references. I will call this DB context. Now we need to create a private field so that we can use that private field to use it inside the onPost method. But I have a shortcut over here. So just click on this variable, press Control dot, and you can create and assign a field called DB context. Now we know that the DB context is being handled from the application because we injected it inside the program.cs file over here. So we are getting an instance of DB context, which we can use inside the onGet and onPost method. So to use the DB context, we first want to convert this view model into our domain model, because DB context only cares about the domain model. So let's put a comment over here to convert view model to domain model. And let's do that. So I will create a new employee domain model is equal to new employee, and you can add the missing reference from the domain model folder. And in here, I will map the fields that we are getting from the view model. So let's say name is equal to the add employee request dot name. Then we have the email, which is add employee request dot email. Then we have the salary is equal to add employee request dot salary. So I'm basically just mapping the values that we got from the form into a more readable form for the DB context. Then we have the date of birth, which is also coming from the request. And finally, we have the department. And I will just press Ctrl KD to format this. So now we have converted the view model to domain model. We will use this domain model and pass it to the entity framework to the database using the DB context class. So now we have a field which we can use. So DB context dot, and we can access the employees table using the property that we defined. So we can use the employees property, and entity framework gives us a lot of methods to play around with the data. So you can see we have the add method, and to this add method, it takes the employee entity, and we have created this employee entity, which is our employee domain model. And we can now simply pass this into the add method like this. Using that, we are telling the DB context to add this new employee. And finally, to save the changes, we have to just remember to use this important statement to use the DB context dot save changes. If you don't use this line, the creation of this employee or the changes to any employee won't be happening. So remember to use this line after you make changes to your database. So once that is done, we can now test this functionality. So I will run my application. We will navigate to the employees/add page. And here we will just add the same information again. And I can say just any junk information. And when I press save this time, I don't have a breakpoint, so it'll run through all these commands and save the employee in the database. So I've clicked that. And the page comes back to the employees add page again. So that means everything went fine and it didn't result in an exception. So if I come to the database to show you if it was created or not, I can now select on the employees table. And previously, when we had 0 results in the employees table, we should now have 1 employee created. And as you can see, we have that employee created with this unique identifier, which is a unique GUID. And we have all the information correctly coming from the form and getting saved to the database. Now that we know our add or on post method to add a new employee is working correctly, we can do a smart thing over here, and we can also give a notification to the user that this was successfully added. So I will create a view data for that purpose so that we can show the data back. And the key for this view data would be message. And the message would actually be and say employee, or let's say employee created successfully. And we want to show this message back to the Razor page. So we will come back to the add.cshtml page. And inside here in the code, we first want to get this string from the code behind class. So when this page is loaded, we will create a new message, which will come from the view data. And the key for the view data we know is message. And if it's not null, we would want to convert it to string. Now, after the heading, we want to display this success message, and we will use a bootstrap alert. So inside a code block, we can say if, and we will use string is not null and white space. So we'll say string dot is null or white space, and we will put a not operator in front of it. So it's not null and not empty and not white space, which is this message over here. Then we want to display this message. So I will use a bootstrap alert class, which is alert and alert success. And inside this div, I want to show this message that we have. So add message and format this document. So now it's time to run this again. Inside the employees add page, I will again add the information. Let's say we have employee 1, and let's say employee 1 at email.com. So any information. And then let's say this is HR, and then press the save button. And this time we get the success message back from the application showing the user that this was successfully created. So we can just confirm this back by executing this, and we have employee 1 also created. Now we have created the employee successfully. So we have done the create part in the CRUD operations. It's now time to read all of these employees from the database. So for that, I will have to come back to the application, stop it, and I want to create a new page. So I will close all of this. We have the employees folder already defined. So I want to create a new Razor page, which shows all the employees as a table. So in here, I will right click on the employees folder, add a new Razor page, and I will use the empty template again. And this time I will call this list.cshtml, and click on the add button. So similar to the add page, we want to first create the structure for this table, and we will use a bootstrap table. And then we will also want to pull back the details from the list.codeBehind class. And if I show you the code behind, that's the onGet method. So we will perform the operation using the DB context, and we will get the values in the onGet method. So let's first start over here. Let's use and inject the DB context like we did in the add Razor page. So create a constructor for this class, CTOR double tab, and then inject the DB context over here, which is the Razor Pages demo DB context. Press Ctrl dot to import the missing references. Give it a name, so DB context, and then press Ctrl dot to create and assign a private field, which we can use inside the onGet method over here. So using the DB context, we will say for the employees table that we have, which is the employees property, we want to get all the employees. So we can do a to list, and this way we are getting all the employees back from the database, and we can store it in a variable. So let's say this is employees is equal to this. Now we want to display these employees inside the list Razor page over here. So we can bind it to a public property over here. So let's create a public property, prop, and that will be a list of employees as it's coming back over here. So list of employees, and the employees can be empty, so we have to first get it from the domain model. And I can mention models dot domain dot, it's actually employee, not employees. So, and the property name will be employees. So now instead of creating another variable over here, I can actually assign employees to it. Now we want to use these employees that we have and show them inside the Razor page, and we will first start with the structure of that Razor page. So I will create an h1 tag to display the heading, and this will say the list of employees. I will give it a class of margin bottom of 3. After that, I will want to create a table, but I want to create a table only when there's some employees. So I want to check first if model.employees is not equal to null and model.employees.any, that means there's at least one employee. Only then we want to show the table. So in here we will create the table, else we just want to say that as a paragraph, no employees found, or something like that. Inside the if block now we will create the table, and the table will have a class which is a bootstrap class of table. Inside the table we will have a heading, so a t head tag, and that will have a row with a few columns, so th. We will show the ID, we will show the name, and we will show the email, and that's it. We will show the other details when they want to view the other details for that employee. So they will press a button and then it'll take them to the edit page where they can view and update the details of that employee. So after the head tag, we want to create the body as well, and we want to loop through all these employees. So I will use a for each loop. So add symbol to write some C# code. And the collection here is model.employees. And for each individual employee, we want to display a row, so a tr, and inside the tr we will have 3 tds. The first one for the ID, So I will say employee dot ID. So I can take this local variable and display the ID for that particular employee in the loop. Then I will use employee dot name to display the name, and finally employee dot email to display their email. So we have the data coming back inside the code behind class in the onGet method. Once this is populated, we are populating this table if this employee is not null and it has some rows. So let's start our application to test this functionality. In here, as before, we want to navigate to the list page. So I will say /employees/list. And this would open our list page, and it is trying to fetch the data from the database. And it has done that now, and also displaying the list of employees inside a table. Now, if we don't have any employees, the table would not be visible, and instead we will see a paragraph showing that no employees were found. And you can see how easy it was to use Entity Framework and fetch and add or create new data inside the database. On the similar approach, we would create a new page which will take the user from this page to the edit page if they want to edit or view the other details of that employee. So we will add a few buttons over here for view, and that will take the user to the view page. So let's do that. Let's come back to our code, stop the application, and now we want to create a new page, and we will call it the edit page. So right click on employees, add a new Razor page, and I will use the empty template again and create this new Razor page. I will name this edit. We have come to the edit.cshtml page, and in here we first want to accept an ID, and the ID is for the employee that the user is trying to edit or view or delete. So Razor Pages gives us an option to read the ID from the route, and we can do that using these double quotes, and inside that we can ask the user to give us the ID. So this is the ID, and we can also have a type safe version of it. So we can say this is a GUID, and using that we can accept the ID in the onGet method. So if I come back to the code behind class using F7, we can now have a GUID value, and the name of this parameter would be ID, and the name has to match what we are referencing over here, and this is the route coming from the URL. So if I read the ID over here, let's put a breakpoint over here, and let's come to the list page in the list.cshtml, and let's introduce another column. So I'll introduce a heading, let's say th, and I will just put a space over there, so that's an empty heading. And in the column value, I will say that this is a button. So inside a TD, I want to add an anchor element, and we will define the href as /employees /edit, because it has to go to the edit page, and / we want to send the unique ID of this employee, which is here. So using an @ symbol, I can say employee.id, and I can change the text of this button to say this is to view, or let's say edit, and also give this anchor element some bootstrap classes. So you can say btn, let's say btn-dark or something that you like. So using that, I will run my application and see if we are able to capture the ID of that specific employee back inside the edit page. The application is running, and I will come to /employees /list to see all the employees that we have. It's getting the data from the database, and we see this new button called edit. And if I hover over it, and you see the left hand corner of this application, it shows you the URL that it will go to. So it's going to localhost /employees/edit and / the ID of that employee, which matches the ID that we have in the table. And if I hover over the second employee, it shows the ID for the second employee. So using this button, if I click it, it comes to the edit page in the onGet method. And if I hover over the ID over here, we can see that the ID is being captured of the employee that we edited or viewed. So we can use this ID to get the details of the employee from the database so that we can populate the form. So let's do that now. I will stop the application and I will first use the DB context to search the database for this employee. So I will say, I will create a constructor CTOR double tab, and in here I will inject my DB context. So Razor Pages demo DB context. Press Ctrl dot to import the missing references and then name it DB context. Press Ctrl dot again to create and assign this private field. Now we will come to the onGet method and use this DB context to go to the employees, and we can find it because this is a unique identifier of that table and it's also the primary key. We can use the find method given to us by Entity Framework Core, and we can pass the ID of this employee. This will give us a response back. So let's capture this response. So we can say employee is equal to whatever is coming back from the database. After that, we will check if the employee coming back is some value or it's null. So we can say if employee is not null, then we want to transform this into a view model. So let's say we have to convert domain model to view model, and in here we will create another view model. So right click on this view models folder, add a new class, and I will call this edit employee view model. In the edit employee view model, you want to get all the properties from the ID to the department. So I will copy all the IDs or copy all the properties from the employee domain model and paste it inside the edit employee view model. Now we don't want to edit the ID, but we would need the ID so that we could fetch the employee's details and update the correct employee's details. So I will get rid of the spaces over here, and we are using the view model so that our domain is separate to the views. So our domain can change, but our views are not dependent on our domain. So that gives us a separation of concern as well. So we will convert this. So I can say var, this is the edit employee view model is equal to new edit employee view model. Let's get this from the view models folder, and in here we want to map all the fields and all the values from the domain to the view model. So let's say ID is equal to employee.id, then the name is equal to employee.name, email is equal to employee.email, then the date of birth, then comes the salary, and finally we have the department. Now we have mapped all these fields into a view model. It's now time to return this or present this to our Razor page, and for that we will again use a public property. So I will create a public property, so prop, and this will be of type view model. So edit employee view model, and I can call this edit employee view model. Now we will populate this property using what we had over here. So I can replace this local variable into this. So we are populating this public property over here. And finally, we are returning the view. Now that we have the edit employee view model populated, we can come back to the Razor page, which is the edit.cshtml. And in here, we can define the HTML structure that will update the values of the existing employee onto this form. So let's first start with a h1 tag, and we will give it a class of margin bottom -3. And this will be edit employee. So we can say edit or view employee or something similar. Then we will have a div similar to how we did in the add Razor page. So I can come to the add Razor page.cshtml and copy all of these over here. So let's just copy one and we will change it accordingly. So I will replace this div and we have a label that is to be used for the ID first. So let's say ID. That has a class of form-label. The input is of type text and class is form-control. And the ASP4 value is coming from the edit model. So if we come back to the code behind class, we have to use this, the bind property attribute as we did in the add Razor page. So if I say bind property, now we can display the values back inside the form and the elements, and also receive the updated values from the form back to the code behind class. So now I can say edit employee view model dot ID, and we don't want the ID to change, so we can say this is a read only field. After that, we will create one for name. So I can change the label to say name, again type of text, and this will be for name. I can remove the read only attribute from this one because we want the user to be able to change it. So I will copy this a few more times. I will change it to email, have the type of email, and ASP4 is edit employee view model dot email. Copy it one more time for salary. So salary is of type number and it's coming from the salary property inside the edit employee view model. Then we have the date of birth, which is the label changes to date of birth. The type is date, and then this is for the date of birth property. Finally, we need another string for the department. So I'm copying the name, that's department, that's type of text, and then the property is for the department. Finally, we will have a button, so a div with the class of margin bottom -3. I will create a button so that we can use it to submit. So type is equal to submit. The class is btn-primary. You can have a different color if you want to. And the text of this button would say update or edit or something like that. Now we need to add a form that when you click this button, it submits a form. So even outside the h1 tag, I will create a form element. I can take off the action attribute and take the form ending tag and put it right at the bottom after the button. So when the button is clicked, it will submit this form with all the values that we have inside the form, and it will come to the edit model page and will come to the onPost method, which we will create now. So we will have a onPost method. So public void onPost, and it will basically utilize this bind property, the public property that we have, and we'll use the values from it. So here, similar to how we did in the add, we want to convert this view model to domain model. So we will say var employee is equal to new employee, or we can say models.domain.employee, And then we want to say the ID is equal to the ID that is coming in, which is from this property. Then the name is equal to this dot name. Email is equal to this dot email. Salary. Then we have the date of birth. And finally the department. And after that, we will use the DB context to update this. So first of all, we want to find if the details are not null. So the form has some values. So even before converting it, we will check if, or we can just straight away say, let's say if this view model is not equal to null, and this dot ID, or let's say just not null, and then inside the if block we will try to search for this employee, and using the same approach how we did over here using the find method, we will say db context dot employees dot find, and we can pass the unique identifier. Because we know this is not null, we can say this dot ID, and we will store it in a variable. We'll say this is an existing employee. We will then check if existing employee is not equal to null. That means we found the employee. Then we will go on and convert this view model to domain model. So I've taken everything inside that if block over here. Now we can update the, instead of creating a new employee, we can actually we can actually update the existing employee's details. So we can get rid of these two lines and this line and actually update the existing employee dot properties. So I used the alt, I pressed the alt and then selected all the rows to be able to edit faster. So I can now change this to semicolons instead of commas. And we are now updating the employee, but we don't want to update the ID. So let's remove that because we want to keep the ID as is. So we are updating the name, email, salary, date of birth, and department. After that, we want to save these changes. So entity framework is tracking these changes, but we want to save it to the database. So we will say db context dot save changes. And using that, we should be able to update this employee. So it's time to test it, and let's do that. Let's start our application. We have the application running, and I will navigate to /employees /list, and using the edit button, I will, let's say, edit this employee and change the name from employee 1 to employee 2. So let's edit that. It comes to the onGet method. I can now take away the breakpoint, and it displays the details of that employee in the form. And let's change the details. So let's say this is employee 2, and even change the email, change the salary to add another $, and let's say change the date to November, and change the department as well, just so that we know all the fields are getting updated. So let's click on the update button, and that reloaded the page. So if we come back to the employees list page, we will be able to check that out. So let's go to /employees /list, and now this employee has changed to employee 2, email has changed, and if I edit to view other details, the details have changed as well. So now we can do a similar thing on the Razor page and create a notification or an alert when this is successful. So I can say view data, and the view data key is message. When this is successful, give me the message that employee updated successfully. And using that, we have given a message. Now we have to check it inside the edit page. So in the at block, you can say var message is equal to, we will read the view data from the key message. If it's not null, convert it to string. And now we can use this message after the h1 tag. Let's say if string is null or white space, and we want to invert it, so I'll put a not in that. We are checking the message string. If that's not null, that means we have a message. We want to use the bootstrap alert, so a div with the class of alert and alert success, and I want to put the message in here using the at symbol, so at message. Now I will hot reload the application. We'll come back to it and reload this one more time. Now with a change, let's say I change it to employee 3 and updated, I can now see the green success message over here. Now finally, we have added a new employee. We have read its details and read the details of all the employees. It's now time to delete an employee. So we will add a button over here which will delete the employee. So let's come back and stop the application. In the edit CS.html, which is our Razor page, I will come down to the bottom and we have this div which contains one button. I will add another button and that will be of type submit as well. And the class will be btn-danger, which is a button with a color of red. And I will name this button or have the value as delete. Now we have two buttons, but we only have one form to submit. So I will also add a class so that we can have a separation in these two buttons. So I will give this div a class of d-flex, using it as a flex box, and then justify content to be between. So we have space between these two buttons. So as I was saying, we have two buttons, but we only have one form to submit. We want to basically submit this form into different methods back inside the code behind class. Currently, we only have one, which is the onPost method, but we want to submit the delete button as well. We want to click the delete button to submit this form again so that we can delete that employee. For that, Razor Pages has the ASP handler attribute. So ASP-handler. So ASP page handler is equal to, and we can specify what handler it will be. So I can specify the word delete over here, and how this will work is it will come to a method if it exists. So I will create a method public void, and the method would be on post, and now the handler name, which is delete. So the delete button, when clicked, will come to the on post delete method. And now we also can change this on post method to say this is the ASP-page handler for the edit or update. Let's say this is update. So the update button goes to the update handler and the delete button goes to the delete handler. So I will change this old on post method to say on post update, and the keyword of the handler should match the handler name over here. So now we have two methods. One is on post update, which is still working, or it should be working. We will test that. And the new one is on post delete, where we can use this ID to delete this employee. So let's imagine this is working. Now I want to find this employee first. So I will copy that row again, and using the DB context, I can say employees.find, and now we will use the edit employee.id because we are submitting the form, and I can say this is an existing employee. I will say if existing employee is not equal to null, that means we found the employee, then we want to delete it. So we can say db context dot employees dot remove, which is the remove method, and it can remove the employee. So we can pass the whole employee object into this remove method, and that will remove the employee for us. But make sure you save the changes afterwards. So dbcontext dot save changes. And with that, we have implemented the delete functionality as well. And because the delete would have been successful here, we want to redirect the user back to the list page because the user doesn't exist anymore. We want to redirect it back, but we can't do it with a void. So we have to change this void method into an iActionResult. And now we can say return redirect to action, or redirect to page, because that's a different page. Redirect to page. And now we can say the page, give the page name, and we will say the page name is /employees/list to go to the list page. And if the delete doesn't happen, we can just go back to the same page again. So we can say return the view, or return the page in this case, because we are using Razor Pages. So with that, we have the onPost delete method as well, and it's time to test it. So I will run the application. The application is running. I want to go to /employees/list, and let's say I want to delete the employee over here, which is employee 3. So I will go on and use the edit button to view or update the fields. But if I want to delete the field, I can use this button. But because we changed the update method, let's quickly test that again. So I will update the department and make sure it's working. So you can see update was successful. And now if I go back to the page, let's say I remove this handler, it's changed to HR, and it's now time to test the delete functionality. So I will click this button, and because the delete was successful, it redirected the user back to the employees list page, where you can now only see a single employee here. And if I come to the database and execute this again, we only have one employee left. So the delete was successful. Now our CRUD operations were successful. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please press the like button and also subscribe to the channel. And I also have the full course on Razor Pages on Udemy, so make sure you do check out the description of the course in the video description below. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.